Have you ever tasted something that made you frown instantly, then laugh and reach for another bite? I mean, a kind of sourness that is not quite lemon, not quite green plum, and not quite vinegar. It does not creep across your tongue slowly. It arrives directly, cleanly, and without hesitation, striking both sides of your mouth at once. Your salivary glands wake up. Your face tightens before you have time to decide whether you like it. And then, just when you think you cannot take another bite, a gentler sweetness appears underneath the sourness, almost like someone handing you a piece of candy after a practical joke. That fruit is tamarind. If you have never heard the name, do not worry. You may have eaten it many times without knowing what it was. Tamarind looks almost too plain to be interesting. It hangs from the tree in brittle brown pods, roughly the length of a finger. The shell is thin and fragile. Break it open and you find sticky, dark brown pulp wrapped around a few smooth, hard seeds. It looks less like a glamorous fruit than a forgotten piece of dried food. But inside that unremarkable pod is one of the most distinctive souring systems in the world. Many familiar fruits get much of their sourness from citric acid or malic acid. Lemons, oranges, and grapefruits belong largely to the citric acid side of the story. Apples, pears, peaches, and grapes are commonly associated with malic acid. Those two acids dominate the ordinary mental map of fruit. Tamarind is different. An important part of its acid profile comes from tartaric acid. Tartaric acid is a name you may have encountered somewhere else. Open a bottle of wine, and, occasionally, you may find small crystals near the bottom of the bottle or around the cork. These are tartrate crystals, often called wine diamonds. They are related to tartaric acid, one of the characteristic acids in grapes and wine. Tamarind is one of the relatively small number of fruits in which tartaric acid plays a major role in the sourness we experience. This is not just a piece of botanical trivia. The difference has a sensory consequence. Citric acid often feels sharp, immediate, and explosive at the front of a taste. Drink lemonade, and the sourness rises almost at once. Malic acid can feel softer and longer-lasting, with a green or slightly unripe quality. Tartaric acid sits in a different place. In tamarind, it helps create a sourness that feels bright, direct, and persistent. The exact balance changes with the variety of tamarind, its ripeness, and the way the pulp has been prepared. So the useful claim is not that every tamarind tastes identical. The useful claim is that its tartaric acid character helps explain why the fruit can feel so sharp and yet so rounded at the same time. When you bite into tamarind, the sourness can arrive with a quick snap and then give way to the sugar in the pulp. It is less like a long, heavy wave and more like a short musical phrase, a clear note, followed by a change in rhythm. But tartaric acid is not the only chemical idea hidden in this story. In food chemistry, there is a famous family of reactions called the Maillard reaction. You create it in the kitchen every day. The brown crust on a steak, the deepening color of toast, and many of the roasted aromas of coffee all involve reactions between amino compounds and reducing sugars under heat. These reactions produce many aroma molecules and often make food darker. The chemistry sounds simple when stated in one sentence, but the actual result depends on temperature, moisture, time, pH, and the ingredients in the food. Browning is not always welcome. A cook may want the surface of a steak to become dark and fragrant, but may want a vegetable soup to remain clear and bright. A cut fruit may turn brown while it sits on a plate, and that can be a different problem again. A cut apple turning brown is mainly an enzymatic browning problem, not simply a Maillard reaction. It is important to keep those mechanisms separate. Acidity can affect some food browning systems. Changing the pH can change the speed or direction of a reaction. Acids can also affect pathways involving metal ions and oxidation. But the result depends on the complete food matrix, the ingredients, the temperature, the amount of water, the reaction time, and the compounds available to react. That means we should be careful with the attractive idea that tartaric acid is a universal browning protector, or that it is clearly better than every other acid. That stronger claim requires evidence from the specific food and cooking conditions. Tamarind should first be understood as a source of sourness. Whether it helps a particular dish keep a brighter color is something that has to be judged from the full recipe and the actual cooking process. Still, this is what makes the pod so interesting. It does not contain just one flavor word. It opens a small lesson in acids, heat, oxidation, and the limits of what a chemical explanation can promise. So how did people discover the culinary possibilities of tamarind? Botanical references generally associate tamarind with tropical Africa and Madagascar, although its exact origin and early routes of spread are not completely settled. In tropical savannas, tamarind trees can become large, broad-canopied trees, and their fruit has long been an important food resource in many regions. The exact date when tamarind reached Asia should not be presented as a settled archaeological fact. What is clear is that the fruit became deeply integrated into Indian and other Asian food cultures at an early stage. In Sanskrit, tamarind was associated with the name amlika, which later developed into forms such as imli in Indian languages. In Indian cooking, tamarind is so familiar that it can feel almost synonymous with a certain kind of sourness. In South Indian food, tamarind is used in dishes such as sambar, a lentil and vegetable stew, and rasam, a thinner, fragrant soup. It also appears in pani puri, the street food snack whose liquid filling often combines sour, sweet, spicy, and salty notes. The important point is not that every recipe has one mandatory formula. Recipes vary by region, household, and cook. The point is that tamarind gives these foods a deeper, more rounded sourness than a quick squeeze of fresh citrus would necessarily provide. It is also practical in preparations that spend a long time in a pot. Fresh lemon juice is often most vivid when added near the end, while a concentrated tamarind pulp or paste can remain part of a simmered sauce. Culinary stability, however, belongs to the whole preparation. Water, sugar, salt, acidity, packaging, hygiene, and storage conditions all matter. From India, tamarind continued eastward and took on new roles in Southeast Asian sauces and soups. In Thai sour and spicy cooking, different regions and cooks use different combinations of souring ingredients. Lime can provide a fresh, high note. Tamarind can provide a deeper, rounder note. Other ingredients can add their own layers. There is no single mandatory recipe that explains every version of a dish, but the combination of different souring materials can create a more complex flavor. The same pod can feel deep and quiet in an Indian stew, bright and lively in a Southeast Asian soup, or sweet and chilled in a Mexican drink. The pod has not changed by itself. The heat, the ingredients, and the cooking tradition have changed the way its flavor is read. The story then crosses oceans. As tamarind moved through trade and cultivation, different kitchens gave it different roles. In Southeast Asia, it appears in sauces and soups. In Mexico, it became agua de tamarindo, a sweet, cold drink made by soaking the pulp in water and adding sugar. It also became part of candies that combine sourness with sugar, salt, and chili. On a hot afternoon in Mexico, a dark amber glass of tamarind water can summarize an entire season: sour, sweet, cold, and intensely refreshing. Tamarind also appears in the complex flavor base of many Worcestershire sauce recipes. Those recipes vary, and the exact formulation depends on the producer, but tamarind is part of the sour-sweet background that helps create a sauce whose flavor is difficult to reduce to one ingredient. An African tree became part of Indian soups, Southeast Asian sauces, Mexican drinks and candies, and British-style fermented condiments. This kind of globalization did not happen first on a supermarket shelf. It happened in kitchens. One cook tasted another cook's food and noticed that the sourness behaved differently. Someone carried seeds or planting material to a new place. A tree took root in unfamiliar soil. Centuries later, that imported ingredient became part of local memory, something people remembered eating from childhood. Why could tamarind travel so far? Part of the answer may lie in the combination of flavor and practicality. Concentrated tamarind pulp can be stored more easily than fresh citrus, although its actual keeping quality still depends on the recipe, hygiene, packaging, and storage conditions. Its sourness is strong enough to be noticed, but it can also support other spices instead of erasing them. That makes it useful as a background ingredient, not only as the loudest flavor in the dish. Fresh lemons and limes are wonderful, but they are often used immediately, and their flavor can change with heat. Tamarind is a sour ingredient that can accompany a long journey, provided it is prepared and stored properly. So, how can you taste tamarind today? The most direct way is to find unsweetened dried tamarind. Break open the pod, remove the fibers, and taste the pulp. A first bite may make you squint. Then the sourness begins to give way to a lingering sweetness. A more everyday option is tamarind paste. In many supermarkets, you can find it in the Southeast Asian ingredients section. Mix a spoonful with water and strain out seeds and fibers, and you have a basic tamarind drink. Add ice and sugar for a refreshing beverage. Add fish sauce, chili, and garlic for a Thai-style dipping sauce. Add it to a stew whenever a recipe needs a deep sour note. There is also a small but fascinating form of tamarind candy. In parts of India and the Middle East, tamarind may be combined with sugar, salt, and spices. Sour, sweet, salty, and hot flavors arrive together, then change gradually as the candy dissolves. Tamarind does not need complicated cooking to become interesting. It is already complicated. Give it a little water and a little warmth, and its layers begin to open. This is why I keep returning to the word bass note. In music, a bass note supports the whole piece even when you do not consciously identify it. In cooking, tamarind can play the same role. It dissolves into a soup, hides in a sauce, or blends into a drink. You may not immediately say, "That is tamarind," but remove it, and the dish may lose some of its fullness. It does not have to take over the performance. Sometimes a good supporting ingredient is the one that allows everything else to become clearer. The final image is an old tamarind tree on an East African savanna. Its canopy is broad and dense. Its trunk is strong. Against the open grassland, it can be seen from a long distance. There are stories about elders meeting beneath tamarind trees, and about the tree's sourness being connected with clear thinking. I have not found enough reliable evidence to present those ideas as a universal historical practice or as science. They belong to cultural memory, not established physiology. That distinction does not make the image less beautiful. It suggests a certain character in the tree, not sugary, not eager to please, and not designed to make you sleepy. Some flavors are meant to wake up your attention. So, the next time you see tamarind on a menu, pick up a bottle of Worcestershire sauce, or order a glass of agua de tamarindo. I hope you picture that old tree. Picture a tree that began in a tropical region, moved through India and Southeast Asia, crossed into the Americas, entered European food traditions, and finally appeared in an ordinary meal far away from where it began. It carried more than one flavor. It carried chemistry, trade, adaptation, and the record of cooks learning from one another. Its sourness is not identical to the sourness of every other fruit. It is a small, sharp reminder that food can be a history book written on the tongue.